guys, welcome back. So I'm going to go over the Java Development Kit, or the JDK, which is what you guys installed. So unlike other compiled languages like C++, Java is actually platform independent. Now, this means that it can be run on different operating systems like Mac OS, Windows, or Linux, even though they have different machine codes. So let's break down the process a little bit and go over what the JDK is actually doing for you. So a quick note before we go into it. These concepts are something that you do not need to memorize or remember on a granular level, but it is important to introduce you to some of the tools you'll be learning and some of the terminology that you might hear in the industry. But again, you can always revisit this later. If you're preparing for a Java interview, you can use your Google Kung Fu skills and just know that it's out there, right? Okay, so first let's zero in on the first two things that you will need to know right away. And that is this javac command and the Java command here. And you're gonna run these in your terminal. So you'll also be using the java.util library. So that's part of the JRE, and I'll get into that in a second. So these are really the three things right off the bat that you guys are going to handle at all, right? The javac command, and the Java command, which compiles and then runs your code. The other thing is you might use later on today this java.util library, right? So that brings me to the next thing, which is the Java runtime environment. So the other part of the Java runtime environment is the Java virtual machine, the JVM. It's kind of word salad, right? But when we want to run our projects, we write our source code as plain .java files, which actually are classes themselves. We'll get into that later. But it's a plain .java file, which is just the text source code that we're going to write. And then in order for Java to be compiled and run on many different platforms, it is first compiled into what's called bytecode, right? So bytecode looks a little bit like this. It's numbers and letters, but it's still not human readable. So these bytecode files actually have the extension of .class. So whenever you compile your file, you will see a .class file appear. So that's what's being created when you run that javac command, right? From there, it will be the same bytecode for any machine. So it's very portable. Bytecode for Windows is going to be the same as the bytecode for Java for Mac, right? So what actually comes into play now is the Java virtual machine, which will actually interpret your bytecode into the respective machine code of that particular operating system. So Mac, Windows, or Linux, for example. All right, so let's just review this real quick, how the JDK works. So to flash review, we've got your Java file that you're going to write all your source code in, right? That gets compiled into bytecode by your Java compiler or javac, right? You're going to use that command javac in your terminal to compile the code. Now, if there are any errors, it actually kicks you back and says, hey, you need to correct the errors first, right? But if there are no errors, it'll compile the entire file into bytecode and then send it to the Java virtual machine in order to run it from your machine, right? So it goes through a series of steps. It'll go through the class loader, bytecode verifier, interpreter. You don't need to know too much about that. There's some just-in-time compilation that goes on where it might replace some data types to make it more dynamic. But eventually what happens is it'll just run the machine code for your respective operating system. So Windows, Mac, or Linux.